church. Oh, one wonderful Savior is Jesus, my Lord, a wonderful Savior to me. He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock, where rivers of pleasure I see. He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock, that shadows a dry, thirsty land. He hideth my life in the depths of his love, and covers me there with his hand, and covers me there with his hand. Oh, wonderful Savior is Jesus, my Lord. He taketh my burden away. He holdeth me up, and I shall not be moved. He giveth me strength as my day. He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock, that shadows a dry, thirsty land. He hideth my life in the depths of his love, and covers me there with his hand, and covers me there with his hand. With numberless blessings each moment he crowns, and filled with his raptures divine, I sing in my rapture, oh glory to God, for such a Redeemer as mine. He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock, that shadows a dry, thirsty land. He hideth my life in the depths of his love, and covers me there with his hand, and covers me there with his hand. When clothed in his brightness, transported I rise to meet him in clouds of the sky. His perfect salvation, his wonderful love, I'll shout with the millions on high. He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock, that shadows a dry, thirsty land. He hideth my life in the depths of his love, and covers me there with his hand, and covers me there with his hand.
Our God and Father in heaven, we thank you for this time, this midweek time we can stop and worship you, Father, and study your word, sing songs, praise you, and think about you, God, in this hour. I ask you, Father, at this time, that you be with those that are coming from surgery. We ask you to continue to Janet, God, and all those that are had surgeries. Pray, Father, that you continue to bless them soon. I just ask you, God, to also be with the Alexander family, Father, the loss of Curtis, and I just ask you, God, that give them peace, and pray, Father, that you help them think about things in their life and what it's good for, Father, and maybe good things that you did. I ask you, God, to continue to be with the congregation. I ask you, Father, to help us to be the kind of people that you have us to be. We can always look around us, good that we can do, and let our light shine in our community. Just pray, Father, that you'll continue to help us to focus on the fact that there's a great opportunity with Alan Webster coming, that we reach out to our friends and our family, and maybe get people that we've married who might have a hard time getting here, that might come to you again. Just ask you, Father, to give us the courage to those people and to encourage them to come and to just pray for those that would, this would be a lot of good fruit that comes from it. So we set up in the name of this service, I ask God that we follow the traveling, those on the prayer list, it's more sins, our sin, our prayer. Amen.
Amen. The song of invitation, number 653, The Way of the Cross.
We're starting the 8th verse in Exodus 34. We just finished talking about the 7 basic characteristics of the Lord. And how whenever we talk about anything that has to occur to the Lord is always in full sense. When it says he's good, he's gracious to everything. When it says he's compassionate to all of us. So it's not a matter of degrees with the Lord, or sometimes with us. It's his fullness. When it says that you cannot tell a lie, that means 100% you cannot tell a lie. And so that section to me is a very good section, and there's a reason that it's in the Bible, and there's a reason it's repeated, and there are many reasons that we need to think about it and think about the God of worship and the fact that in Ephesians chapter 5 verse 1 it says, "Be imitators of God, be followers of God, be imitators of God, your children." And so we can't be imitators of God, we can't be followers of God without knowing a little bit about His character. When it says God loves, it loves in complete sense. When it says God hates evil, He has no tolerance for evil at all. We have a certain level of tolerance for evil, most of us do. God has none. Because everything with Him is in absolutes. When it says He's merciful, He's 100% merciful. Any of the other characteristics that He has is something that we can take to mean in a complete way, in a full way. And so we're starting in verses 8 and 9. Anybody have any questions up to that point? Okay. And Moses is back on the mountain again. We remember that. The Lord had told him to cut 2 tablets and take them up with him. And so we'll read a little bit more of that as time goes on. So we have the Lord passing before Moses in verse number 6 and proclaiming the name of the Lord. Verse number 8 says, "So Moses made haste and bowed his head toward the earth and worshiped. Then he said, If now I have found grace in your sight, O Lord, let my Lord, I pray, grow among us, even though we are stiff-necked people, and pardon our iniquity and our sin, and make us as your inheritance." I'll just read on a little bit further. It says, "And he said, Behold, I make a covenant before all your people. I will do marvels such as have not been done in all the earth, nor in any nation. And all the people among whom you are shall see the work of the Lord, for it's an awesome thing that I will do with you." And you think about the great prospect of these migrants, yes, there are a lot of them, going into a land that's fortified and that has very powerful armies and strong armies, very unlikely that they're going to be able to do what they want to do without God's help. And so he says, "Observe what I command you this day. Behold, I am driving out from before you the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite. Take heed to yourself lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land where you're going, lest it be a snare in your midst. But you shall destroy their altars, break their sacred pillars, and cut down their wooden images. for you shall worship no other God, for the Lord whose name is jealous is a jealous God, lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they play the harlot with their gods, and make sacrifice to their gods, and one of them invites you, and you eat of his sacrifice. And you take of his daughters for your sons, and his daughters play the harlot with their gods, and make your sons play the harlot with their gods. You shall make no molded gods for yourself. And so he explains why he's giving the commandments. Now, sometimes he explains why he's giving the commandments, and sometimes he doesn't. We just have to have the trust and the faith in him that we're going to do what he says, regardless of whether he explains it or not. And so that's our part. His part is to tell us how to live, how to serve, so that we can go to heaven. That's what we're created to go to heaven. We're designed to go to heaven. And we just have to have the confidence in that we're going to do what he says, and just believe that it's factual, that what he says is true, and he's not going to depart from that at all. And so if you look back at Exodus 33, verses 12 through 13 and 17, we'll read that Moses had found grace in the sight of the Lord, and when he recalled it before the Lord, it was on behalf of Israel. Okay? So Moses is not speaking so much for himself as he is for Israel at this time. This is concern for them, and that the Apostle Paul had that kind of concern for Israel. My heart desire for Israel is that all of Israel be saved. Paul wrote to the book to the Romans first. And so he pleaded to the Lord that he go up among them, like the Lord said he would do, but when the Israelites broke the covenant, he was no longer under obligation to go up among them. So the covenant was a conditional covenant. Since covenants are two-party deals, they're always conditional, aren't they? Can you make a covenant with yourself? I suppose you could. I mean, think about New Year's resolutions. How many people keep those? That we have maybe had fun doing them, but we have a horrible time keeping them. So I suppose you can make, like Job made a covenant with his eyes that I'll not look on a young woman. So he made a bargain, he made a deal with himself. That's up to us to maintain that. But a covenant generally is between two parties. And so the condition is implied that both parties have to stay faithful. Otherwise, it's not a covenant. Okay? If it's just a one-sided thing, it's not a covenant at all. It's just a mediate of some sort. So all covenants, when they're between two parties, are conditional covenants. So we want to run the door that's not fit there. And so Moses pleaded that the Lord go up among them. He also confessed that they were obstinate people, stiff-necked. What's obstinate mean? Bull-headed. Yeah. You know why bulls have that ring in their nose? It's not because it just looks good. What's that?
To control them.
Yeah, to control them. I thought Alan would answer that, but he's all paid in himself. That's exactly right.
Alan knew that was too easy.
Yeah, that was too easy. You just let somebody miss it. But that's a fact, because when the bulls aren't stirred up, or they're not angry, or they're not around some other cows that Mother Nature's on her part or God's on his part, that's the only way you can control those donkeys. If you want time in a stable, you've got time where their nose, you're going to tell the water thing. Okay? So maybe that's where the idea of being bull-headed came from. I don't know. I've heard people call mules obstinate, and I've also heard people call people obstinate. And so that's where we get the term mule-headed. Right? We're mule-headed.
Bullheaded.
So what?
Bullheaded.
Bullheaded, yeah, and mule-headed. Yeah, we call mule-headed too. At least they didn't like it. Maybe I just called that one a few times myself. And so he confessed the term obstinate people because the Lord's been telling them. And he's not kept any information back from him. He's been at least if they needed to know at a particular time, he's given them full transparency. That's what he expects of them. But and at least on a couple of prior occasions, yes, they'll do everything that he's commanded, but they don't. But they don't. I think there's a teachable moment in that when you think about why they kept the revolving door on. And so you think of where permanent change has to come from with respect to a human being.
In the heart.
That has to come from
In
the
the
heart.
heart, in the mind.
Permanent change has to come from the heart. And if it comes from the heart, that's where our core values are changed, like Paul said in Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. When he says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that's what he's talking about. So if it comes from the inside, it's far more likely to be permanent than if it's just superficial and something we're doing on the outside. And that was a problem that Israel had. For ages and ages, it's a problem a lot of people have today. It was a problem that the Pharisees had. He's talking about the Pharisees in Matthew 23 and so on. They say and they do not. So their righteousness was an outward righteousness that didn't come from the heart. And so they were constantly going back in, and that was the problem with Israel. So they had powerful people who were punishing them if they didn't toe the line, but their hearts weren't changed. And so for 2,000 years, it's in and out, in and out, in and out. And when Jesus came, there was more out than there were in. Because they had their hearts hadn't been changed. And so that's where it has to come from with us. There is a place for doing things repetitively, and that sometimes helps to condition our hearts because it gives us time to think about why we're doing what we're doing. But if the heart doesn't change, then we're likely just to relapse back into sin. That's called recidivism. And that's why we have so many unfaithful Christians. Because it never gets in where it's supposed to be. You know, Hebrews chapter 8 says, I will write my word on their hearts. That's from Jeremiah 31. Hebrews chapter 10, I'll write my word on their hearts. But if it doesn't get there, then change is very transitory. It's here for a while and it's gone for a while until finally it disappears. And so that's what makes it difficult for God to deal with us. We have to let him in. Where did Jesus say with the church at Philadelphia, I think it was, it's in Revelation chapter 3. He said, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man open the door, I will come in and sup with him, and he with me. And I will make him to sit down in my throne, even as I am set down in my Father's throne. So we have to let him into our hearts. We have to do that. Now we can do a bang-up job just being outwardly religious, just so people think, well, that's the most religious God I ever met. And still have a corrupted heart, which God sees. And he knows how deep our faith is. And it has to be very deep. And so that's the problem that they had. And so Moses went on to plead with the Lord that he might pardon their iniquity and sin. And that's a good word. There's not much difference in, there's no difference in what the Hebrew word and the English word says. When you pardon someone, that means basically, and this is a country, it means you let them off the hook for something that they've done, that you receive a pardon. And you're allowed to go back free and go back to business, hopefully with a corrected life and a corrected mindset and a corrected lifestyle, so you don't go back where you were before. But Moses is not, he never denies that they sinned. As a matter of fact, he was saying, yeah, you know, when the Lord told him to get down off the mountain, he said they're hard, they're an obstinate and stiff-necked people, and Moses said, you're right. You're right. And he went down and saw what was going on. So he's pleading that they may be pardoned. And that's really what happens in atonement, isn't it? When Jesus pays the price, and we're pardoned. And had he taken as his inheritance And if you go back to Hebrews chapter 11, verses 24 through 29, that's the Hebrew writer's little short summary of how they were led out of Egypt by Moses, how Moses counted it better to suffer with the children of God than enjoy the pleasure of sin for a season. By faith they crossed the Red Sea and so on. They traveled through, it's not covered in Hebrews chapter 11, they traveled through the wilderness from one end to the other. And why did God do that? So why did he call them out of it? He called them out because of the promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? For what was the promise? That he was going to make their descendants his people. His people. He called them by name. His people. Israel, which was Jacob's name given by the Lord. And so he wants them to be his people. That's why he called them out. He didn't call them out to kill them in the wilderness. He called them out because he wanted them for his people. Okay. And I say the silver lining behind all the cloud in Israel's travels through the wilderness is that it preserved the remnant. It preserved the remnant. And how many that remnant total, I have no idea, but I know that it's a fairly significant number. Although most went astray, that remnant was preserved. And so there were people who were willing to change and who were willing to obey. And I think maybe the same thing through the church. I don't know. I think maybe it is because Israel is a type for the church and not all Christians stay faithful. As a matter of fact, when you read about disciples of Christ before the church was ever founded, we have people that rejected Jesus. We have disciples that went back and walked with him no more. Paul warned Timothy by name of people that had been disciples that he said they had a form of godliness, but they denied the power of it, the authority of it. So who are the warriors? John talked about people like that. In 2 John and 1 John, both. And so in the church, he's still preserving his faithful remnant. And not everybody in church when we say, think about the kingdom parables. You know, think about the parable of the tares. Think about the parable of the dragnet. The good separated from the bad. Think about Matthew 25, the latter part of that. So those on his left hand went away to eternal destruction. Those on his right hand, as the goats, the sheep, went away to eternal life. Now, think about Matthew 7, 13 and 14. Enter into the straight gate, for God's gate lights the way to lead to destruction, many there be that go in thereat. Have any of you have ever done Island Stewart's lessons and personal work going on in any of the families? You ever see those? That's the door, that's the opener that when he trains people to those campaigns, that's the opener. Do you believe that those people will be saved? That's the opener. Do you believe that those people will be saved? And that generally, I've used it in the past. I've used it. I still have a stack of them downstairs if anybody wants to look at them. I've used them occasionally, but I've used to use other things. But that most generally always opens up some sort of a dialogue. Now, how long it lasts, I can't tell you. Because sometimes it lasts a while and you get a good conversation. The other time, people just, their eyes glaze over and they can stop listening. So that's the key question that he said. Do you believe that most people will say? Okay. And that gets people thinking. Okay. So you can use that even if you don't use Openstein, writings go to ODS or combined stuff. You use that question. And so that he take them as his inheritance. In 34 verse 10, just a question.
So in verse 9, again, it says, Moses is saying, pardon our iniquity and our sin. So that's like forgiving them of their sin, right?
Yes.
So how does that fit into, because that's how they would kind of put sin too, as forgiveness of sin, but how does that fit into Jesus later on?
Well, that's like in prospect, because of course, they've already been offering sacrifices. But all of those sacrifices are still in prospect of Jesus coming when Jesus comes. And so he can pardon iniquity by people being faithful under the old covenant before the death of Jesus. But it's not something that's permanent until after Jesus comes. Okay, because it's just the blood of Jesus that washes away sin. And that's a Hebrew writer said it's impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin. It's impossible. But they're forgiven in prospect. And so he gives them, and this is his mercy and his grace, he gives them the opportunity to make a change, make a permanent change. Because then again, when they broke the covenant, it's like we talked a couple weeks ago, he had every right just to incinerate. Every right. Like Sodom and Gomorrah. Very impenitent bunch of people. But he didn't do it. And so this is all, and then even back when you think about the Lord providing animal skins to cover Adam and Eve. You know, there's a little bit there about that too. But that's the first time that the animals were ever killed to cover up the sinfulness of the human being, and the Lord did it. So he's the one who set the precedent for that. So there's that. I don't know if that answers your question. No. Any thoughts? Papa knows all that. But anyway, just jump in if anybody has any wisdom to share. I've got a couple of them, you know, but it can be pretty quick. So is that satisfactory? Okay. All right. Okay. And then he said, behold, I make a covenant before all your people, I will do marvels. So when he said, I make a covenant, Moses brought the 2 tablets up, what's he going to put on the 2 tablets? Same thing you have on the first 2. Same thing you have on the first 2. And so this is not a new covenant in terms of being a different kind of covenant. It's simply a renewal of the one that he gave them previously that they broke. They broke covenant by worshiping God. And so this is a renewal. So he says, I'll take care of this. He said, I'll make a covenant. And we find out later that it's the same, on the same conditions. The book of the covenant that we read about previously is still in effect. It's to be kept outside the testimony as a reminder of their sins in the wilderness and so on. And I'm talking about the book of the covenant is different than the 10 Commandments. It has more information in it. Okay? And so we have a lot of that information that we've already studied. And it will be added as time goes on. Until we finish the first 5 books of the Old Testament. He says, before all your people I'll do marvels such as you've not, since it's not been done in all the earth and in any nation, and all the people, you know, when we think about those, once we get over to the book of Joshua, now even before we get to Joshua, we're going to see some magnificent stuff in the wilderness. Now, when we get to the book of Joshua, and Israel's occupation of the land of Canaan, they're beating some tremendous odds that are pretty much stacked against them. And they can only do that with the Lord's help. No way they could have done it on their own. And I've been reading, I like reading about, I know several archaeological feeds on the internet, and I've been reading about some of the new things that they have discovered archaeologically. And how now people were saying there's no evidence according to what was called the Egyptian chronology, which maybe is as much as 200 years old for that matter. But they say there's no evidence of the Semitic people being in Canaan at that particular time. But they're finding more evidence of Semitic people in Canaan, of Hebrews in Canaan. And so the more they dig and the more they look, the more they find them. Okay? And so again, we don't need that to prove the Bible, but it sure helps the naysayers, to be able to think a little bit more about that. And so he's just going to do some marvelous things. When you get into the book of Joshua, we'll be able to see that. Okay? Observe what I command you this day. I'm driving about before you the Amorite, Canaanite, Hittite, Perizzite, Hivite, and Jebusite. These lists are not always the same. Sometimes it adds one, sometimes it takes away one. But we understand, when you're making a point with the people that were the occupants of Canaan, you're talking about all the occupants of Canaan. Okay? So it varies from place to place when you read about it. It doesn't mean that there's an error. It simply means this is a point. These are the occupants of Canaan. They're going to be moved out. So you can move in. Okay? And then take heed to yourself, and this is, we're warned about this, are we not, in the New Testament? And we're warned about this too, about our associations with people who are non-Christians, and people on the outside, practitioners of other religions, which basically are idolatry in one form or another. When he said, take heed to yourself, that lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, where you are going, lest it be a snare in your midst. But you shall destroy, and think about what you want to just remove the temptation. You want to remove the temptation? So he says you're going to destroy their altars, break their sacred pillars, and cut down their wooden images. For you shall worship no other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Why? Lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they play the harlot with their gods, and make sacrifices to their gods. And one of them invites you, and you go to eat your sacrifice. You start intermarrying with the pagans, and this becomes problematic for everybody. And so the Lord is simply saying, if you want to mess this up, this is how to do it. And if you want to keep it right, then there has to be a wall in terms of relationship between you and them. And that's the wall of faith primarily, and the wall that's raised up by the law of God, by the word of God. And so that's why he continues to say, be faithful, 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 be faithful, over and over and over again. And so when they worship the golden calf, they made that big problem. They had that big problem there as well. If you go down to the relationship was restored with Moses' intercession, because again he's acting in the role of that mediator, and that's the intercessor between God and Israel. If you look at, let's look at Romans 5 verses 10 to 11. Look at a few of these verses. And somebody got Ephesians 2, 14 through 16. So Romans chapter 5, 10 and 11. There it says, for when we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son, and much more having been reconciled, we shall be saved by his life. And not only that, but we also rejoice in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received the reconciliation. So that's what happens when you're reconciled to God's society and God's culture. Okay? And so they were pardoned and they were reconciled to that fault. So he's given them an opportunity to come back in. Who has Ephesians 2, 14 through 16?
For he is our peace, who hath made both one, and hath broken down the middle wall of partition between us, and abolished within his flesh him, even the law of commandments, containing in ordinances, which maketh himself plain, one new man, to making peace, that he might reconcile both God in one body by the cross, and in swing and be thereby.
Okay. So in all these other verses, anybody else have Colossians 1 or Ephesians? Have you got Colossians 1, 19, 23, anybody? If you don't, that's okay. If Alan has it, go ahead.
For it pleased the Father that in him all the fullness is well, by him to reconcile all things to himself, by him on earth or things in heaven, I can make Jesus above the cross. You who were once alienated and enemies in your mind by wicked works, now be reconciled. Body of his flesh for death, to present you holy and blameless above his presence, so that you continue in the faith, grounded and steadfast, and not move away from the hope of the gospel, which was preached to every creature under heaven, of which I, Paul,
Okay, so when you talk about reconciliation, what does reconciliation imply? If you,
You're making things right.
yeah, you've been separated by one thing or another. So reconciliation means bringing you back together. And so for Christians, when did that occur for us? Jews or Gentiles?
Baptism.
We're baptized. We're baptized into Christ. When we're baptized into Christ. And again, that obedience has to come from the heart, like Romans 6:17 says you have the faith in the heart that form the doctrine which you deliver. He's talking about the doctrine of baptism, he's talking in verse number 3. So you have to obey that from the heart. And if we just get dipped thinking somehow getting dipped is going to do the job, it doesn't do the job. Because it doesn't change the heart. So we have to obey the heart. Galatians chapter 6 verse 1 is a little different. He says, you are spiritual, restore such a one, and with the spirit of meekness, I shall also be tempted. So that's reconciliation is a restoration of a relationship. So that,
The Israelites, or the Jewish people in Exodus, they weren't able to convert someone that's not Jewish to Judaism, could they?
well,
Like one of these, let's say a Jebusite.
Strangers.
They had brought a Jebusite in and turned him into a Jew.
here, when we go back and look at their, and I have to look it up and think of the verse, but when he talks about the feast of the Passover, he said that no outsider can partake of the feast of Passover unless he accepts everything else that you're doing. Yes, they could do that, but the impetus was not upon them to convert someone, it was on someone from the outside wanting to identify with Israel. And so he did say that God did say, if you follow these laws, and you can dwell among the people, then you can partake of the feast of Passover, but not. And it's a little bit different than what the Jews later centuries did when they apostolized.
That's what I guess I'm getting to is that God was on him to stay pure to the Jewish religion.
Yes.
To his religion that he had laid out for them and so forth. And not to be out here getting involved with other people. You know, and I think it's a little different. It is different from our perspective today in the fact that we're supposed to stay faithful, but we're also supposed to bring people to.
It is very different.
So we bring people to Christianity, and so I guess that's I don't know why I'm talking my head.
Well, that's an excellent point. It's true. I mean, they were told for the most part not to associate with people on the outside. However, there were, when you think of the people that came out of the land of Egypt, those were not all Jews. There was a big mixed multitude that came up out of the land of Egypt. And so I'm thinking back, when I think about when the Lord said that, I think maybe he's thinking about that mixed multitude. Did they embrace the Jewish religion? Did they not? Now again, he never told the Jews, to my knowledge, he never told the Hebrews to evangelize them and bring them in. He's simply saying if they, by their own will, come in and obey and want to be part of the Jewish nation, there's a way to do that. And so it's big different. That's a whole lot different from saying, go preach the gospel to every creature. Yeah. That's a big difference, major difference.
Verse 12, it says, take heed to yourself, lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land where you were born, lest it be a snare in your midst. And so, I guess when you think about what is a covenant, and what we would do today, make a covenant with someone where we would be what they call unequally yoked together, or whatever that might be. And I think that there's, and I've been told in the past that I should not be in business with someone who was not in the church. I don't think that's what you mean.
It's not gonna be,
And, you know, so it's like, you can't go about your life as a Christian without interacting with the other people that are in the world. It's just how we interact with them and what
that's the issue. The issue is how we interact.
Yeah.
That's the issue. And we know where to have where to make no bonds, no covenants with people that don't have. So I'll give you an example of how that happens sometimes. And I'm not talking to the Metro Association as an example, because I'm talking to them the other one. I'm not trying to be any different. But that's what they do in the Ministerial Association. There are all these different churches that don't teach the same, don't believe the same thing. But they covenant with one another, or covenanted with one another, not to steal sheep from each other's flocks. That is what I think is wrong. I can't do that. I mean, if I can get something that says they're not sheep anyway, if they're with them, they're goats. You know, so I can't make that kind of covenant. I can't agree not to evangelize. So the first thing I have to ask people is, you know, what church do you belong to? If on this list, sorry, I'll be somewhere else. See, that's what it means to covenant with people. Well, they may do it in different ways. And as he goes on here, he's talking about the first covenant that was ever made. He said, lest it's unmarried. So it's go back to the book of Genesis. That's the first covenant that ever existed. And so that's covenanting.
Well, the other covenant, the covenant we make in baptism, we make basically a covenant with the Lord to be faithful, as He makes a covenant with us to save us if we are. And so I think that when you think about that particular covenant that we have, that each of us have done, you know, when we break that covenant, that's when Jesus' grace comes in, and that's when we come to the able to confess our sins, renew our covenant.
Very good. If we confess our sins, if we walk in the light of His in on it.
Right. So we're renewing the covenant. So when we do things that separate you from God, there's a way to make it a renewed covenant. And so it goes back, and I think that, and I don't know, I can go back to what Corey said about in forgiving the sin. But I would say that it said, pardon our iniquity and our sin. And so in those times, the pardon of the iniquity was done through a sacrifice. That's correct, right? So in this example, are we to assume that there was a sacrifice that was going to be made at that time for them to God to pardon the sin that they had just
The sacrifices have already long been a part of the relationship. And until we get down to the point where it starts in the next chapter, that the tabernacle was built. So the Lord's been refining this down. So we get to the point where the tabernacle is built, and then the sacrifices are to be done in the tabernacle. So He's refining that down. And then we have a priesthood who makes atonement for the whole nation. Okay. First for themselves and then for all the people. Oh, that's okay. That's no sidetrack. On sidetrack.
Randy, it's like a pardon has more to do with, say, yeah, you committed that, but that's how pardon works together.
Yeah, that's what pardon is.
When in 1974, Richard Nixon was pardoned by Gerald Ford, and
these words that really is kind of like, this works better? You know, so sometimes it's tough to see the shades of difference.
And that's why of the covenant between the people. There's an example of that, where it's in Joshua chapter 9, to give you a nice, remember the story that went over the hill with their full clothes on and bunch of holy bread, and we came a long way. They just came from over the mountain. And it says in Joshua chapter 9, verse 15, that Joshua made peace with them and made covenant with them. The very thing that Moses was told not to do after there's more extra, he did that. In verse 16, it says, and happened at the end of 3 days after they made a covenant with them, that they heard that they were their neighbors. And that might be part of the mourning here, God made covenant with other people. Now, the rest of it, when they found that letter, they made the Midianites root cutters and water carriers and servants who were good. They didn't inquire of anybody, they just made it up.
They just went ahead and jumped ahead and just took them at their word.
So this might be an injunction against things like that.
Yeah, well, sure it is. I think also, you know, in making sacrifices, when you think of when Abraham and the Amalek covenant was formed, that had to do with the sacrifices. You know, covenants also were sealed by sacrifice. So I think maybe it's implied here. And so you go to, and so the word saying you cut down their pillars, you level their altars, that's the word about making sacrifice. Those are all horns. So we really have to be careful with that. You know? I mean, what is it? How far can we go to be at peace with people who do not believe in Jesus Bible without being infected by that? I mean, first, we're here to change the way people think about God and Jesus. You know, we're not here to be changed by the religious environment that we're in. We're here to make change. And that's the reason our relationship with Christ. You know, our relationship with Him is not to change the church, it's to let Him change us. And so that we have to be very, I can use the word zealous. It means zealous. We have to be very zealous about trying to find out what it is He wants us to do and trying to do it the best we can. And even at that, we still aren't going to be perfect at it. But we never forget where the information is. Are we subject sometimes to this imperfect? Yeah, let's find out we are, but we know where the truth is. And so we just don't, well, you know, that doesn't fit the paradigm I'm living in, so we'll just make kind of a different church over here so everybody else likes us. You know, if we start behaving like the denominations, then we're not going to just become one. Yes?
That's even regarding what we're reading here and studying on the denominations, churches around here so that we can study them. I found myself, I gotta be careful when I'm studying them, I'm watching videos, listening to videos and that, because they argue their side, or explain their side on each other's such. And you gotta be careful, because it's easy as human beings to start to fall into that. And you gotta remember the Bible, you gotta know the Bible, you gotta know the scripture before you start studying what another church does.
Yeah.
If you don't know scripture, you're gonna study it.
And that's one of the reasons the study Bible is very meaningful. Because sometimes people they get all their information from the study Bible. That's why can't afford a library. Years you can't find it. But so they get a study Bible and get wedded to the doctrine of the theology of that study Bible. With dates and Schofield, which were the big premillennial ones back in 1800 and 1800. They're still one person. And so that's another thing that we have to be careful with about one. When we get our interpretation from the study Bible. I'm not saying all this is bad, some of them are pretty good in some places, because you have to watch the whole poison field. So we have to be on our toes, when we're dealing with things like that. So you think of, back to what we're looking at here again, when he's talking about all this, as I just have, he's not going to let his presence among the people be ignored. He's not going to do it. So if we're going to make this work, it cannot be normal. You have to listen to him. And you have to do what I tell you to do. And that's very important. And that's why, can we ignore his spiritual presence among ourselves? It's pretty light. But he doesn't allow that if we want to have a relationship and get through him to heaven when we die. And so he says he's going to do awesome marvels. Why does he do the signs of wonders? To prove that they're his people. He's the only God. That's it. And it's the same thing true in the same thing is true in the New Testament. He didn't do them just for show power. He did them to prove that he was the only God that could rightly worship. And so he's going to do a bunch of signs and wonders never before experienced from anyone on earth. Like Genesis 18, verse 14, it says, anything too hard for the Lord, no, it's not. He can do and he will do what he wants to do because he is wonderful when he wants to go. Nothing to go. And so if you take the signs and wonders out of the Bible, you're eradicating a lot of evidence. And when you try to kind of commonize the signs and wonders, like the Red Sea was a reed sea and it was only an inch deep. Like Sinai was a volcano and all that. Like Jesus did not walk on water, it's just a myth. And all of those things. That came out of the Age of Enlightenment back in the end of the 1800s into the early 1900s, modernism. You can't explain anything. That's the there's a word for that. Try to think of what it is. And nothing changes. Universalism. But nothing changes. Well, was there ever a time that God did those things? And just because we can't do them today, does that mean he didn't do them then? No, it doesn't. If he's who he says he is, then he can do what he said he did. Okay? And so, we'll get through this now. But the conversation is good because, listen, this is a lesson that Israel had a hard time digesting. And so we can spend some time on how many times are supposed to chew your food before you swallow it? Right, somebody tell me. 20 times, okay? So we need to be chewing our food there a little bit before we swallow it, right? So I don't mind taking time if we're working through these things. Then we did it, we got it. And
You have a chapter and verse for that one.
no. How many times you chew your food? I have no idea where that came from.
That's based on how many teeth you have.
That's probably true. That's probably true. I was using that as an illustration.
I gotta say, you gotta be careful, you never know what might be a mess there.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just making a confession. When I was a kid, I would count my teeth. And I couldn't tell any difference between 20 and 18.
Well, I did a search, I put a post on Facebook yesterday, it was about, like mother, like daughter. And, I'm like,
I never saw that.
yeah, I'm like, I've heard that saying before, what does it really mean? Well, look it up, it's scriptural.
It is.
And it doesn't have a good connotation either.
Jeremiah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
bad connotation.
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa.
Yeah. So they gave it as my song.
Earlier, Joe, about studying with a church
Yeah.
back in 778. Very nice guy with the Methodist church. Buckingham,
I wouldn't straighten the stuff. It was a good study. And they admitted that we were right. But they said they couldn't change because that was what about capability. But you had to be on your toes. But we used that to do so all five of them. You guys are right.
Mark has some members encouragement to take down. What's the numbers in Mark?
653.
Did y'all hear that? I didn't.
653.
Okay, all right, thank you. So if there's anybody here this evening that needs to come before the assembly, I can all go to the invitation before, and you know why we do it every time we assemble. And, you know on the board that you can bring something forward, and we'll leave it. Let's stand, please. Mark, please.
I must needs go on by the way of the cross. There's no other way but this. I shall ne'er get sight of the gates of light if the way of the cross I miss. The way of the cross leads home. The way of the cross leads home. It is sweet to know as I onward go. The way of the cross leads home. I must needs go on in the blood-sprinkled way, the path that the Savior trod. If I ever climb to the heights of life, where the soul is at home with God, the way of the cross leads home, leads home. The way of the cross leads home, leads home. It is sweet to know as I onward go. The way of the cross leads home. And I bid farewell to the way of the world, to walk in it nevermore. For my Lord says, come and thus seek my home, where he waits at the open door. The way of the cross leads home, leads home. The way of the cross leads home, leads home. It is sweet to know as I onward go. The way of the cross leads home.
Thank you, Randy. Good lesson this evening, as always. I wanted to let you know that what Gina does with her studies, does orthotics, prosthetics, and stuff like that, that people are needing, and everything like that. It's good stuff that she's doing. Hopefully, greater work out. Does anybody else have anything before we dismiss? Or would you find closing prayer for us?
Let us pray. Almighty God, we thank you for this midweek study that we had here this evening. We thank you for Randy who prepared for this lesson and brought to us in a way that we can understand it. And we thank you that you were able to watch over us and bring us out here this evening. Father, we ask that you would those that are sick at this time, those that are healing at this time, those that are spiritually weak this time, we ask that you would be with them, comfort them as only you can. And Father, we ask that you would work through us, help us see the opportunities that you put before us, that we would have the courage to speak to those that are in need, whether they're those that are within our flock, or whether it's those that are outside the flock. Please give us that courage and the ability to see what you put before us. Father, we ask that you please forgive us of our sins. We ask that you help us realize that we will not forgive us of our sins. Father, we thank you for this congregation. We thank you for Jesus Christ that made it so possible. It's only because of the Spirit.
Where's the little kids off?